Hello and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Summit POW Hour. My name is Rick. I will be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please submit a question using the Q&A panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listener-only mode, and as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We will be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of each of today's presentations. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop-down as all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Bradford Rand, CEO of the Cybersecurity Summit. Bradford, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Over 500 senior level executives have registered for this event, so I thank you so much for your time. We have a lot to cover here. This is our inaugural cybersecurity briefing for this region of the country. We've got some wonderful experts that are going to share their knowledge, their experience, best practices, and of course, current threats. We look forward to our live events, the Cybersecurity Summit, hopefully soon in the future. But for now, we're going to give you as much information as we can virtually. So thank you so much for your time. Without further delay, because we want to keep this as much of a fast track as possible, we're going to roll right into this. We're going to have Q&A, as Rick said, in between each speaker. So if you have some great, intelligent questions, we'll be happy to field them. And without further delay, let's get right to it. I'm going to be introducing Josh Sini. He is the Network Intrusion Forensic Analyst from the Criminal Investigative Unit from the U.S. Secret Service. Handles a lot of cybersecurity crime. And without further ado, let's get Josh on the line, and we can begin immediately. Thank you again for your time. Josh, you can...
Okay. I am here, Mr. Rand. Can you hear me? Okay, so I'm going to jump right into this. Right now, I've been asked again, I'm Joshua Sini. I'm assigned to CID. I'm out of our Detroit field office in Detroit, Michigan. So I am right here in your Midwest region. I am one of your points of contact. Some of the things I've been asked to speak about to kind of build into the other presenters today are some of the things that are currently trending. From a criminal standpoint, a lot of our investigations, at least in the Midwest region and Detroit area, at this time are focusing in on business email compromises and ransomware. Those are two of the areas that individuals have suffered some, businesses have suffered some big financial loss and also some compromise via notification, things like that with reputation when personal protected information or PII is exposed to the outside. Some of the other things, obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the COVID-19 criminal trends. We'll talk about that in a second. And then just go over some general prevention, or just more so, not necessarily prevention measures, but to get your train of thought going, because it is an ever-changing environment with a remote workforce. And then the other presenters will hopefully, or not hopefully, but they're going to build on that. Went the wrong way with that, I apologize. But with the business email compromises, we're still seeing the phishing and spear phishing attacks. For those that don't know, phishing is a generality. They blow an email out to everybody and as many people as they can hit. Spear phishing are the targeted attacks, a little more socially engineered to look a little more personal. They also tend to go after the deeper pockets with that, not necessarily as the target, but as the focus of the scheme. The CIOs, the people who have the check and the purse strings, who can approve financial transfers. We're still seeing the malicious software sent via emails. They're clicking on documents that contain embedded macros, which would then, when someone opens up that malicious attachment and enables macros within their reader of choice for the document, things start happening in the background the user doesn't even see. They're planting some software on your network to give them a foothold, and then they're taking in from there. We're still seeing brute force password attacks. for systems that don't deny multiple password attempts after so many failed attempts. They don't shut off that IP address and they just allow it. So we're still seeing that. And then obviously the whole gist of the business email compromise is to spin the whole conversation to inject themselves into a financial dealing, which then facilitates a wire transfer fraud. So your business is sending them money, or your clients, instead of paying your bill, funding them. And that's their whole thing, is to compromise that email chain and interdict into that whole conversation as if they're a participant from the beginning. Ransomware. I think ransomware is a much bigger problem than what's actually being reported. I think a lot of times we have ransomware attacks. They don't necessarily get reported to the justice system. Businesses may replace via backup and then just move on with business. But there's new twists on ransomware that definitely need to be thought of, especially from an information security standpoint. Again, they can start with a spear phishing attack, the remote access brute force. That's the whatever method of remote access you may have into or have not turned off if you don't need it, into your computer networks. Especially now, people are remoting into work. So those, if it's an item that is or a software package that's susceptible to a brute force attack, it's being attacked. And start thinking about it that way. Don't think about, well, if we get a brute force attack, think about, okay, we are being brute force attacked. How can we prevent this? How can we prevent them from gaining access to our networks? Again, that malicious email attachment, they want our employees to click on those so that they can embed what's called a command and control software that goes out and answers to the command center, and then they can actually come in and either automate it through AI or a script, or they can come in person and move around laterally and do what they want in your network. The other thing, too, to think about, not necessarily start thinking about not only the security of your own network, but do you allow vendors, third-party vendors, whether it's your IT staff or whomever, a software package manufacturer, who you bought the software package from, are they allowed access to your network? What kind of access do they have? Is it a set in stone access where they can come in anytime they want? What happens if their network is then compromised? Are the credentials to get into your network saved on their end? So now we need to partner with our third-party vendors. We need to start looking at security as a team, not just our networks. So basically, as a community of all the different software packages you're using, broaden that security conversation, not necessarily with your internal team alone, but include these third-party vendors in those security conversations. The other thing I've seen with ransomware, I had heard about it, but then I finally worked a case with one, is malicious websites. I had one that I worked that was set up. It was a one dot. So as websites go, the legitimate site was help.softwaremanufacturer.com. Well, what these bad actors did is they generated a false website that ended up being helpsoftwaremanufacturer.com. So they took out the dot. So somebody by accident left the dot out when they were just trying to get help from the support section of the software manufacturer's website. And within 7 minutes, they had a vulnerability in their web browser, which was not kept up to date. Within 7 minutes, all their data on that machine and all file shares was ransomware and encrypted up. So we have to be careful about that too. It may be an outside click. The other thing too is why, if you're on a server, why would you be surfing the internet on a server? The website advertisements. We may be allowing our employees through whitelists to visit certain websites. Those websites are screened. They're from reputable people, or even our websites that we may host, company websites or things like that. If we allow advertisements, are we screening the advertisements that are being purchased for those websites, or can anybody without any vetting purchase those advertisements and somebody click on them? Those advertisements themselves could bounce someone to a malicious website. So that's another angle to try and get into your systems that's out there. The big thing with ransomware, there's a trend here that and I don't know the cause of it. There's some speculation that potentially because there are some people that are paying ransoms now or not paying them, and they have really good backups now, so they're generating, they're putting their networks back online, and they're not paying the ransoms. So now there's the potential more nowadays for exfiltration of data and holding your data hostage, and then using the ransomware to cover up the fact that they came in and actually took data, whether it's intellectual property theft, personal protected information, client data, billing data, that they want to spin and leverage sell it on the dark web or leverage themselves for some of the frauds that are out there where they need names, dates of birth, social security numbers, and things like that. So we can't just look at a ransomware to replace a backup we've remediated. There really needs to be a little more investigation there as to what transpired prior to that ransomware being kicked off and things being encrypted. Is it someone just covering their tracks because they've committed a larger crime that could definitely hurt your industry? And that brings us to the current global trends. I have a point here to say it doesn't have to be COVID-19, but COVID-19 is kind of a two-pronged attack that they're using, because bad actors will do anything to generate more anxiety or a sense of urgency, whether it's trying to get into that email chain where you're conducting a large financial transaction, land purchase, company purchase, anything like that, and they're interjecting into there, and they want to change that wire transfer. They want the money. They don't want the deal to go through as it's planned. So they want to, whomever they can fool, they want to create anxiety and urgency. Well, COVID-19 is obviously a global trend, or I should say, a global incident that they are leveraging without a doubt to create anxiety and urgency. Not necessarily for the fraud, not necessarily for the actual wire transfer fraud, but to create that urgency within an email to get your employee or yourself to click on that bad document or a fraudulent advertisement that's sent to you. The other thing with COVID-19 is the remote workforce. The remote workforce itself right there, look at how many doors that has potentially opened into your networks. We have remote solutions now that are in place. Has your remote solution been vetted? Is it encrypted traffic or is it wide open traffic? So you definitely want a VPN solution. And again, no entity. This is another thing that as I've spoken with people who've been hit, both in government and also when I was in the private industry, we did a lot of insurance work. Many companies felt that they may have been too small and weren't necessarily a target. Well, if you face the internet, if you have any network device that is attached to the internet, you are a target. It doesn't matter if if you only have one server and you have one location. That doesn't matter. You are a target. The internet makes no discrimination against small or large businesses. Obviously, if on the flip side, if you are a large target, there's a lot of people that are going to be after you to try and get into your networks because they see a deeper pocket for potential profit for them. The COVID-19, we have mass email campaigns. They're posing as both the World Health Organization, other health organizations. Sometimes they try and tailor it to a region as they send out their blanket emails. They'll, in our Midwest region, they may blanket us with information out of Chicago, Detroit, Columbus, Ohio, Toledo, Cleveland. They'll try and pick something regionally and kind of tailor a personalized message. Again, looking to get that click from our employees without a pause because they want information about what's going on. They want to feed on fear and they want to generate more because then there's more likely that our employees and ourselves are going to let our guard down and click on something. Again, that malicious attachment, that attachment could be, test centers in your region, click here, free test being offered, click here, or vaccine found, click here, breaking news. Again, that's the type of thing that we're seeing being sent out right now. And the same thing, malicious internet links. It doesn't necessarily have to be an attachment to an email. They may have a link in the email to try and get someone to forward to a site that's going to send some bad software, malware onto the system. Charity scams for fraudulent entities. Many, they did the same thing with Katrina, with the flooding and things like that. They'll leave no stone unturned, unfortunately, to make a bad dollar. And they will prey on our goodness, our goodness at heart as humans, to try and help others and reach out to them. They'll generate, and they are creating these charities. So definitely, if anyone is going to donate funds or goods, please research it first. They also prey on people's goodness with the emails about charities. So make sure it's a good entity before a link or an attachment is opened. They're advertising right now for fraudulent test kits and equipment. Saying, especially when PPE levels, if someone is in an area with that and they're having problems getting that, and you see this blanket email that says, PPE at reduced rates, or we have it in stock, they're looking for that dollar to be sent to them, and the kits may not arrive. So you may not get the PPE that you're purchasing for your employees, or it's not really PPE. You don't get something that, say you purchase face masks and it's a fraudulent scheme. Those face masks may not protect you from anything. So again, you're not going to get the quality and control in the items that you're purchasing either. We're seeing those fraudulent schemes come about. When we start thinking about our remote workforce, again, I spoke about it, I just touched on it very little bit. The remote and secure VPN solution, that virtual private network solution to secure that traffic between our network and our worker. And then again, is it updated? Is it upgraded and continually monitored? We need to be, there's many websites out there that post daily vulnerabilities in software and vulnerabilities in hardware. Are our security teams looking at those? We look at those before we respond to a case. We'll ask you what software you're running, a little bit of the generalities about the breach, and then we're going to hit the vulnerability sites before we even put boots on the ground at your location, because that's potentially where the malicious actor got in. So I can't stress enough to stay up to date and continually monitor software and hardware vulnerabilities. Our enterprise security standards enforced on remote connections. This is another huge one. Are we allowing employees to work on an employee-owned device, or are we providing them a device that is under the control of our network security and is locked down? So what are they accessing? So to deem, does an employee need a work laptop that's secured by us? One of the factors that may deem that extra expenditure could be, what do they have access to within the network? How high of a priority it is to protect that? Are they using the same device that their kids use to play games, that their kids and they use to surf the internet? So is their device potentially susceptible to an intrusion? And then we're now allowing them to remote into our networks. So we need to start thinking about that. The third-party vendor security and accounts. Do we allow third-party vendors credentials into our network remote, or do we only turn them on when they need to come in and then turn them off when they're finished doing whatever upgrade or software checks that they have done? It needs more overhead, more people to flip that switch on and off. But again, if we use temporary passwords and accounts for a third-party vendor, that does offer a little bit more security that we don't have to worry about when they're not in the system if it's disabled at the time. Another huge one, multi-factor authentication. Do you have a multi-factor authentication put into place? If you haven't, I can't stress enough that is massive. It's not just a username and password anymore. We want, that we need some other type of authentication here that can get, that this is our employee that's logging into our network and seeing and using our resources. The complex password requirements, it's a pain. I realize it. It's a pain for me as well. And also the rotating passwords, I don't like them, but I understand them. The other thing I stress is I tend to tell people, don't think of a password as a password anymore. Think of it as a passphrase. It takes a little bit longer to type into the computer or during the login session. But to me, use a phrase and then throw some symbols and numbers in there and some capitals and lowercase. Don't look at it as just a simple password. Phrases to me are better and easier to understand or remember. Continued network monitoring to include access and failed access. Failed access attempts, if you don't monitor your failed access attempts, you're potentially missing heading off a brute force attack. Proper backup solution put into place. The biggest thing with the backup solutions, we're seeing now with intrusions, the intrusion may have occurred 6-7 months prior to a ransomware attack. They may have been in there 6-7 months. One of the purposes for doing that is to get their intrusion into your backup chain. So if their intrusion is in your backup and then they ransomware you and you go ahead and remediate with backups, are you remediating right back to your breach? And also, or are you remediating to a good backup? So you want to continually check and monitor for these intrusions, even though you haven't had a big event. And then the other thing too is don't just restore from a backup and then forget to plug the vulnerability. Research and find what was vulnerable. How did they get in? Let's get remediated by our backup, but then let's fix whatever the problem was. Don't just remediate with a backup and then roll on with business as usual. Continually training the employees, massive. It's where the biggest emphasis should be, in my opinion. They're the ones that potentially could click on a malicious attachment. They're the ones susceptible to a social engineering attack by these personalized attacks. They're the ones that potentially, they are frontline security. There's companies out there that will come in and assess employee cybersecurity and then also continually assess and evaluate your employee on operational security. They will send out false emails with non-malicious attachments that are formatted in current trends to see if your employee will click on it. If they do, you're notified, the IT is notified, and then that employee gets sent on to a remedial training to keep them aware of it. And definitely keep your open line of communication. It's harder now with the remote workforce, but keep those communication lines open. Look at your protocols in place for financial transactions. Do not reveal financial account and transfer information in emails. Find a different means for that. And then also voice confirmations. Do you require a voice confirmation on a phone from a check writer or someone that can release funds? Or do you just allow the whole transaction to take place via email? Because that's your business email compromise vulnerability right there. The biggest thing that I think any of us can do is cultivate an ownership of network and business security with the employees. Let them own that. They are the security of the network. If we can cultivate an ownership of security and get them to care, even though it's not my home computer system, it's not my car, it's not my house that someone's breaking into. If we can get them to be a part of the ownership of that corporate environment, and businesses and the business network becomes their computer system, the business building itself becomes their home, then people are more likely to take that pause before they click on something because we institute some caring in security there. Just a suggestion there that I've seen that other people have kind of worked into a system is a positive reinforcer for employees who have identified and reported a legitimate security threat to IT. Business I was with had a very public thanking system in place so that other employees knew of the employee that stopped and prevented a threat, and also saw that very public thank you and positive reinforcement and reward for doing so. One of the last things I just want to provide to you all, is our contact numbers. These are our main numbers for the Midwest region. I have Chicago, Cleveland, obviously Detroit field office was where I'm located. Indianapolis is another one. There's also a lot more non-field office Secret Service offices with the secretservice.gov. And then if you go to our website, you'll see contact and field offices, and you can get the one that is closest to your facility if you do need us. We also do outreaches and presentations, things like that, if you'd like, once things settle down and you would like an in-person with your employees. Department of Homeland Security, Be Cyber Smart website, us-cert.gov. It's a great infrastructure security site, and also CISA is a great site as well. They publicize the vulnerabilities in software and hardware on a regular and routine basis. They also keep track of up-to-date releases of patches that come out, and they have great news feeds off that you can plug right into your email RSS feed and stay up to date with that. And with that, I can open it up to any kind of questions, Mr. Rand.
Okay, terrific. First question that we have here, it said that, why do you say ransomware attacks are more prevalent than are being reported? What's the victim's motivation for not reporting these attacks?
I think it's, at least from being in the private sector, we had just being scared that something's going to be very public. They don't want to lose the business, things like that.
Especially if they're publicly traded, I guess.
That's correct. That's very correct. And it's financial. I mean, at the end of the day. But at the same time, when you do report it, especially with this, we're not out to publicize things like that. We're out as the Secret Service to get the bad actors. Many people, I think, are also under the falsehood that, it's probably not in the U.S., which many are not based in the United States. But what many people don't know is the Secret Service and other government agencies, we partner together with foreign nations, and we have served search warrants and arrest warrants overseas for bad actors that don't operate in the United States. So if there is a chance to get some justice and have that long reach to a foreign nation, it is your federal services, and we partner with state and locals as well to assist them in doing so. So it's not just a local crime, or it's just because it's out of the country doesn't mean we can't follow up on it. A lot of our information too, from the political house and the diplomatic side of it, even if we can't reach out and grab someone in person, that information and the statistics could potentially be shared with our State Department and our diplomats as they negotiate with foreign nations, and it gives them some actual statistics to show their counterpart in that foreign nation.
Okay, great. We have another question. You and I touched upon this right before the presentation. We can almost marry the two comments and questions. When would somebody call out to your office, and what is the least amount of money that you would investigate? Is there a certain threshold?
There are thresholds for prosecution, but we would not shy away on any, especially network intrusion investigation, because the ransomware it is that large of a problem. So there really isn't. There's not a monetary cap when it comes to network intrusion response. The thing about reporting is the quicker we can respond, the better. Obviously, one thing you want to get up and running as a business, you don't want delay. So the same thing on our response. I want to be, when I come out and put boots on the ground at your business, I want to be at least disruptive as possible. I'm going to work in unison with your IT department. I'm going to work, if you have cyber response team, IR response team coming out, I'm going to work with them. And we want to get on it as quickly as we can, especially if there's been money that has exchanged hands in a business email compromise. If we can get on it quickly enough, there are different things put into place, if we can get into them fast enough in the financial system, that we might be able to halt that wire transfer and get that money back. And it's all time sensitive. The other thing with our response on scene is the more we use a computer, the more we potentially stomp on evidence. Just like old school, scene of a crime in a field. The more people that come out and walk around that field, the less likely we're going to be able to retrieve that valuable evidence.
Terrific, terrific. And that about wraps us up. Well, we are at 12 o'clock, right on time. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Again, thank you so much for your service to our country. And, we will stay in touch, and we look forward to more time with you in the future. And any closing remarks?
I appreciate everyone's time. These are tough times, and then all of you are in positions where you get even more worries of what's going on in the world thrown on top of you with cybersecurity, the ever-changing realm of which people are trying to steal from us and hurt us. Your time being spent in this talk is the first step or continued steps towards cybersecurity, which it's very important. I mean, we are in a cyber war right now. Whether it's with criminal organizations, criminal subjects, or nations, and the fact that you're caring enough to be here, I greatly appreciate that, and I thank all of you for your time.
Josh, thank you so much. Stay safe, my man. Take care.
You too. You too. Everyone stay safe. Thank you.
Got it. Bye-bye. We're going to immediately bring up our next speaker from Duo Security. We're going to bring Dave Lewis. Dave, can you hear us? Can you hear
me?
I
can hear you. Can you hear me?
Terrific. Well, one of my favorite expressions, zero trust. Whether it's my friends, business associate, trust nobody. And I know you're going to talk about that and a whole plethora of other tools and experiences. And thank you so much for your time today, Dave, for joining us and speaking to our crowd. We have almost 400 people attentively listening to you. So without further ado, the CISO, Global CISO, Dave Lewis, from Duo Security, which is now part of Cisco, which is what we're on right now, Cisco WebEx. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here today. Pardon me. There we go. I am the Global Advisory CISO for Duo Security, which is now part of Cisco, and it's been a very interesting career for me. I started out back when the world was flat. If I'm being completely honest, I started duping video games in 1983 and selling them to kids in school, but I've come a long way since then. So along that road, I've actually done a lot of things, especially working in the U.S. I did a lot of work for the FBI, for the Department of Defense. I've been in healthcare verticals, power systems, financial services. I've been around the block quite a few times. But one of the things that I like to identify myself as is a hacker. And when you check things out online, you find out that hackers are not well received pretty much across the board. But I tend to make up with that for the fact that I am a Canadian. And I am working with Duo, and I've been there for a couple of years now, and we joined as part of Cisco just under 2 years ago. And for those of you who were listening to the first speaker, which was fantastic, by the way, was the fact that we are available on the Cisco website, but that's the last thing I'll say about that. So now that I figured out how to control the slides, the interesting thing here is when Duo and Cisco came together, I think we really missed a wonderful marketing opportunity by calling it a disco, but that remains to be seen. And thank you, Wendy Nather, my boss, for that one. So our mission is really simple. Our mission is there to protect your mission. And we are there to help with things like multi-factor authentication and other items to that effect because we want to talk about zero trust. Now, zero trust, you either love it or hate that term. That tends to be a divisive factor, but the thinking behind it is really the important part. We have to make sure that we are looking at the aspects of all the good things that go behind that name. This was a term that was coined a few years back, and back in 2010 to be exact. And it's really about assuming your networks are hostile. It's not a rip and replace conversation. We want to make sure that we are talking about things about reducing risk to the organization. Now, if I asked a room full of people, say there's 100 people in a room, and I ask them what is love, I'll get a different answer from every single person. Unfortunately, the term zero trust has really devolved into that for a lot of people, is you will get a different answer for every person you talk to. The idea is really simple. It's about reducing risk and understanding that everything is on fire. You want to treat every laptop, every desktop, every server, every network as being potentially hostile. And this is a really good way to look at it because you are making sure that you're setting yourself up properly in the way that you need to be thinking about these sort of things. Because problems are going to happen whenever you don't expect them to happen. It's not always the external attacker that's coming after you. It is sometimes quite as simple as something went wrong in production. And as a security practitioner, we tend to be looking at it much in the same vein as somebody trying to dodge a train. You're putting your hands over your head, you're screaming, you're moving along, and then you realize, wait, it's not quite as bad as all that, because we're here to work together, and there are things that we can do to improve how things are going. So, as I mentioned earlier, there was the term was coined back in 2010, but in 2004-ish, there was a group called the Jericho Forum that came up with a paper that was about deperimeterization, which was basically the forerunner and the original stake in the ground for dealing with what became zero trust. This was really about that idea, and roughly about the same time, quite coincidentally, I was talking to folks at the company I was working at, and they said, one of the things we should do is, rather than have all these network zones segmented out without any sort of proper connections between them, we should make sure that we are taking all the laptops, all the desktops and servers, and locking them down all in the same vein. You don't want to have systems in the DMZ that are, or DMZ rather, that are locked down a certain way, and the ones on the internal are wide open. This isn't going to help things. And we flash forward through time here. We look in 2014, Google announced their version of Zero Trust, which was Beyond Corp. The interesting thing here is it took them roughly about 8 years to implement this project, and that was with a dedicated team. So if you're looking at doing Zero Trust in your environment, don't lose heart. It's a game of increments. And there are excellent resources out there. There's one book in particular on O'Reilly called Zero Trust Networks, which is an excellent resource to check out. And it's really about how we deal with the changing landscape. We have all sorts of SaaS-based offerings, AWS, Azure, whatever it happens to be. We have a mobile workforce, and in this day and age, we have suddenly been given a mobile workforce that we may not have potentially expected, but now we have to deal with it. And we have to make sure that we are securing our users in a way that they have the same experience, whether they were in a physical office as they were before, or working from home, or wherever it happens to be. We want to replicate that experience. You want to be able to enable multi-cloud access. You want to be able to enable BYOD. There was a time where people using their own systems was considered a really bad idea, and this was really a divisive factor about 10 years ago. Now, with using Zero Trust as your model, you can actually implement things like this. You can have people surfing using their PS4 to go through an SSL VPN. I don't recommend it. It's kludgy. I've tried. But the whole idea here is to reduce breaches overall. The idea of the traditional perimeter, has really gone by the wayside. This was a deprecated notion, and I'll tell you exactly how far back in time that was deprecated in a little bit. Zero Trust is really a simple approach. It is literally about reducing risk, and your perimeter is now anywhere an access decision is being made. And we all love our triads. There's the CIA triad. Well, here we have the ADU, the apps, devices, and users, and these are the things that you have to concentrate in your roadmap to get to a Zero Trust framework. And that's just it. It's a framework. It's not an end state. It will constantly iterate over time. And there's 5 easy steps to go through. Well, not so easy, but there's 5 steps you can go through in order to get there. First and foremost is you want to confirm the user identities in your environment. You don't want to be like me, where you one day go in to do an assessment of the usernames and accounts for your organization that you were working at 10 years ago and realize that there was about 10 accounts that had super user status. One of them was somebody who had left the company 5 years earlier and was now deceased, but their account magically was used 2 years ago. These are the kind of things you don't want to find happening in your environment. Now, once you've gone through this rationalization of looking at all the user identities in your environment, you can move to the next step where you're looking at the visibility. You're looking at how the users are operating on your network based on the data that you've collected from the Zero Trust application that you have leveraged in your environment. You're looking at how the devices are behaving as well. And in the next step, that takes us to our next step, rather. You want to ensure device security. You want to make sure it's patched to current or N-1. You want to be able to enable your end users to patch things that you don't have to centrally manage, sort of like browser updates is a great example. Then once you got that in place, then you go to the next stage, which is level 4, where you are enforcing contextual access policies. The idea behind this is you don't necessarily have to have your people in finance accessing backend servers over SSH. There's no reason for it in many cases. And you want to be able to have policies for each individual business group if you so see fit. You want to reduce the risk in your environment. You don't want to have application developers accessing financial services systems that they're not supposed to get into, as an inverse of that. And then the fifth step is you want to be able to secure access to all of your applications. You don't want to have Dave Lewis sitting at a Tim Hortons just outside Toronto, Canada, SSHing into your systems or accessing your email when I have no business being there. Now, over time, one of the things I've learned is that castles simply don't scale. Because you have a castle wall, you have a moat, you have not necessarily got yourself in a secure fashion. And one time years ago, I was told, it's okay, we have a firewall. Everything on the inside is fine. We have to make sure that we get away from this notion, because just because something's on the inside of your network doesn't mean it's secure. To build on that, another idea is, we all like to be environmentally friendly, but one thing we should make sure we're not doing is that we are not reusing passwords on multiple sites. And this is a really interesting behavior that I've noticed over time. Every once in a while, I get my hands on a data breach dump of user accounts, and I'm able to go through there and find that there is replication where people are not only reusing passwords, they're also using their corporate accounts. So all of a sudden, you have a username and password which has a pretty good chance of being leveraged somewhere else, where the attackers could then take that information and use it against other sites to increase their abilities or their access. And that's just it. A password is really simple. If I drop my keys on the side of the road and there's some sort of identifying factor on the keychain that makes it people understand that, yes, that's Dave's keys, well, then they can get into my house. That doesn't mean that they're supposed to be there. It just means that they now have access. And we want to be able to verify these users, and if they are not who they're supposed to be, we're able to taunt them and send them packing on their way. So before I ever got into security in any fashion whatsoever, I did a degree in classical studies and archaeology, so I've been around the block a few times. The one interesting story I took away from there was the sack of Rome in 410 AD. This is where the Visigoths were able to take the city of Rome simply by surrounding it and waiting for them to run out of supplies. So back in 410 AD, the idea of a perimeter approach like we see in far too many cases today, this was shown to be demonstrably broken back then. And in Canada, one of the jokes we like to say is, you can always be safe when you're out hiking in the woods as long as you're faster than the hiker behind you. But when you put that into a computer and security context, you're looking at it these days, there's more than enough bears to go around. And we want to make sure that we're reducing the risk into the environment. We don't want to be the flaming sword of justice. And when I say that, this is a gentleman that I worked with, not this particular picture, but I worked with somebody years ago where his entire mantra was, how do we get to know? As security practitioners, we have to be there to enable the business. Otherwise, the data breaches are going to keep on coming. And as we see with all sorts of reports, case in point, DBIR is out today, there are all sorts of cases where we see that data breaches are involved with either weak credentials or stolen devices. And this is a real problem, especially when we take into account how much of a porous perimeter we have into our environments today. As we like to think that we are locked down and secure, but there are all sorts of possibilities for the attackers to break in, and we need to mature our understanding as to what the perimeter really is. And full credit to my boss for that one, that the perimeter is anywhere an access decision is being made. And our new perimeter really is just that. It is expanded well beyond what we took for granted in the past. We have remote vendors, we have contractors, we have personal devices. The shift has happened, and that security has to take that into account. And when we're talking about zero trust, we want to make sure that we're looking back to that triangle I was talking about earlier, the triad rather. Visibility of every application, trusted access, and visibility of every application, trusted users, and trusted devices. Now, back in 2012, one of the things I started doing was I was tracking data breaches at the time because it seemed to be a big summer for breaches. Little did I know that this was the leading edge of what was to come. And back then, we see, 6.5 million records was considered a massive breach at the time. That has definitely fallen by the wayside. And I know how painful it is to talk about these sort of things because I've been through that before. Here's an example of a screenshot of one of the servers at a company I worked at years ago where we were compromised by a group called Root Beer Sec. It really kind of stung, and it really did cause a great deal of consternation. But luckily for us, this was just reputational risk. But That's not always the case for everyone. As we look back about 4 years ago, we see this from a site called informationisbeautiful.net, where we see millions and millions of records. Flash forward to a few years ago, we're seeing millions upon millions, in some cases, billions of records. So much so that the site that does this had to actually change the way they presented the data so it would fit on the screen. And we have to understand that there are targets of opportunity. In the United States, as an example, right now, as of the last iteration I checked this morning, there's over 182 million open ports in the country. Now, that is not a bad thing in and of itself. That just means there are a subset of that are susceptible to security breaches. Case in point, of those 182 million ports that were listening, 1,562 of them were susceptible to Eternal Blue. 18,000 plus were still susceptible to Heartbleed, which actually is a bit of a staggering figure when you consider how many years that's been lingering about. And 38,000, almost 39,000 ports were open and accessible or vulnerable to Bluekeep. These are the kind of things we have to take into account every time we attach a system to an external network. We want to make sure that we're devaluating stolen credentials. We don't want to make the attacker's job easier. There's no good reason for that. We want to make sure that we're looking at things like dealing with bastion hosts. We want individual laptops, desktops, and servers to be able to have a shared level of security, and I don't mean that in a Tootsie Pop kind of way. We want to make sure that it's not just a hard outer exterior and a soft, chewy center. This is something that we have to do a better job of. We want to make sure that's solid all the way through. We want to set expectations, because you don't want to go in there saying we're going to be zero trust by 2021 and be done with it. It's not going to work that way. You're setting yourself up for failure. You have to understand that it is a game of increments. And as you're going through, and every time you do something new, like rolling out multi-factor authentication and what have you, you want to make sure you're celebrating those wins and helping to make your entire staff champions of this as well. Because if you're democratizing security, you're making it as easy as possible for the users to be part of the solution, as opposed to trying to vilify the users for doing things wrong. You want to determine what your priorities are within the organization. How are you going to move forward? What is it that you're going to try and accomplish first, and set that as an achievable goal. Once you have that stake in the ground, you can move on from there. Because the attackers are going to do things you never expect. So by most reports that we read today, we'll find that, on average, it's about 200 days for a data breach to become known. Now, just imagine if an attacker was able to breach your network and it took you 10 days to find out. That's 10 solid days of using legitimate credentials against your site that look like legitimate traffic. We want to make sure that we are taking this ability away from them. And multi-factor authentication is an excellent example, as our speaker before me mentioned. You want to make sure that you are going through security best practices. And we always talk about best practices, but we want to make sure we're actually practicing. Verify your users, verify their devices, and protect all the applications. You want to have it as simple as this. You want to have your source as truth. Example is Active Directory. You're going through, it checks the Active Directory. Yes, it's a valid user. Yes, this device is in our inventory. Yes, multi-factor authentication is checked. Then and only then can you access one of the applications that your organization allows you to get to. That way you don't have random users that are going in and accessing your resources. You want to make sure that you have trusted users. Are the users you have in your network the ones that are supposed to be there? You want to take away the ease of use for the attacker. If they have a username and password that you have used on multiple sites, but you have multi-factor authentication, they can't get in. If you have a trusted device that you still have in your possession, they can't get in. So you're making it that much more difficult for them to get their job done, and they'll move on to the next target. The catch here is you want to make sure that you're sharing this information with other organizations so you can all collectively learn and benefit and better protect yourselves. Trusted devices, make sure they are the ones that are supposed to be there. You can enforce it to your users and say, look, your application is out of date, but here's how you can upgrade it. Here's how you can upgrade it. You want to make sure that any BYOD device that's attaching to your network is patched to current or N-1, depending on what your appetite is for your organization. And every application that you have in order to run your business is one that you can control, that you are controlling the access to. And be able to get granular and saying this particular geo-block can't access or whatever it happens to be, yes, that is a mild solution, but it does take a lot of the noise off the line. So let's go through it and look at it from a zero trust shopping list. You want to have an asset inventory. You want to have solid user management. You want to go through and make sure you have a uniform security policy that you apply across the board in addition to having your granular policies. You want to have a defined, repeatable process, and this is something that you can do in your organization. You don't need a vendor to come in and do this for you. This is something you can do yourselves. Once you have all of these things in place, once you have all of this data being collected, you can look at how the users are behaving, how the devices are behaving, and most importantly, network zone segmentation. There is no reason in this day and age to have a flat network that spans the globe at a company that I used to work for who will remain nameless. The authentications need to flow. We want to make sure that we are looking at security in every layer. Supply chain here, this is a particular slide, we're looking at undersea cables. This is just one example of the multiple layers that go on top of this and a way that the attacker is looking at it. The attacker is not just looking at your website and go, I'm going after this. They're looking at every possible angle to get in because things are going to happen. Example, this is how many SSH daemons are listening in the United States right now, and this one here is a particular sample that had multiple vulnerabilities. This is just one of many examples. We want to make sure that we are not making it easier for the attackers. We want to encrypt all the traffic in flight and at rest, and have to constantly look to a better future as how we're going to do things. Multi-factor authentication is one step towards getting rid of passwords. And as we move forward, we have to look at stuff like WebAuthn, which is an open standard that was published by W3C last year. This is an example of how we can move towards a passwordless future where we don't have to worry about usernames and passwords. If you take nothing else away from this talk today, please look this up and read about it. This is the next coolness. So let me sum it up. We want to make sure that we're assuming that all networks and devices are hostile. Start there as your baseline. You want to have a trust engine that you've rolled out. You want to reduce the attack surface because you do not need to make it easier for the attackers. Continuously validate because your perimeter is anywhere an access decision is being made, and you want to keep it simple. You want to build that asset inventory. I'm a big fan of repetition. You want to have a solid hold on your user management, and you need to know what's on your network. As I said a moment ago, defined, repeatable process is a key differentiator. And then right through to network zone segmentation. Make this something that has to happen. Now, the flaming sword of justice that I talked about earlier, this is something that was a mentality that I encountered in far too many businesses. And thankfully, I see this is starting to melt away where security is understanding it is there to enable the business. And we have to make sure that we are doing a better job of ensuring that the users understand that, especially in times like this where we have a newly minted remote workforce that may not have the confidence level being out of the office, being remote that they had when they were in four walls. They want to make sure that they have that ability to understand that they can reach out and ask for help, and we need to be there to provide that. We no longer need to be the folks that are throwing the holy hand grenade of Antioch every time that something goes wrong. We can do better. And I would like to thank you all for listening today. I greatly appreciate your time and attention. And that is how you can get in touch with me. Feel free to reach me at my email or on Twitter.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. You got it. Let me just see if I can get video here. Boom. Okay, there we go. Got to do the window shade there. Okay, terrific. All right. See, one of our first questions is, how can organizations build, I mean, you kind of touched upon it already, how can organizations build a zero trust model? And I guess the better question is, where would they start?
The one that I always like to hit upon is multi-factor authentication is really the easiest first step after you do your homework. And what I mean by that is you have to go through and rationalize what are the user accounts in your environment, what are you trying to protect, what are your assets, how are your networks partitioned out. Once you have a solid hold on this and you've actually addressed the idea of defined repeatable processes in your environment, then go talk to a vendor, because you don't want to go to the vendor not knowing what you're looking for, just saying that you want to be zero trust in any way, shape, or form. You want to make sure you've done your homework before you ever talk to the vendor.
Okay. We have another question here, but before I do that, I'm going to send a quick chat out to everybody. Let me just see if I can do that. All right. That is, if you do want to follow up with Duo, if you have any additional questions on any of their tools, I just shot every one of you. I think there's about 400 of you. The contact information, Lauren Dillon, and you can email her if you have any additional questions for Duo. Here's another question. How can you manage zero trust with fourth parties? Understanding the agreements are with third parties, but some things are outsourced even further. Interesting.
Well, in that case, that's less of a technical discussion, more of a contractual discussion. You want to make sure that you have that baked in and have good lawyers on staff in order to make sure that you have ironclad agreements. So if your third parties are outsourcing to other parties, you need to have that sort of thing spelled out in agreements, because I've run afoul of this in the past where we did have a problem like this, where a fourth party was compromised, and we didn't find out until after it was too late. So yeah, you need a strong contractual language around that.
Terrific. And final question, as I like to ask a lot of my experts and speakers, in the case of a breach, if there is ransomware, what do you recommend that the CISO or the CTO or the VP of IT security, what's their first move?
Oh, honestly, the first move is, before that happens, is announce a prevention. You want to make sure you have a solid backup strategy. You have the ability to recover. You don't want to have to do a bare metal start from scratch, as we've seen with some organizations in the past. You need to have a strong BCP and DR strategy in place before any of this transpires, because as much as we like to pretend, this is not something that's actually new. This has been around for a long time. It's just becoming more pervasive at this point. So your first step is make sure you have a solid game plan.
Sure. We have one final question. How do single sign-on applications fit into your vision of zero trust?
They're absolutely a piece of the puzzle. It's all about reducing risk. So if you're able to reduce that risk by not having multiple passwords stuck to the edge of a monitor in somebody's office, you are winning right there. Single sign-on is a great way to do that, where you're able to marshal that access. So I think that, that along with all the other individual components to reduce the risk in the organization is absolutely fundamental.
Terrific. That brings us to our conclusion. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Brad.
And there we go. We have another great speaker teed up. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon. Now we're going to bring the conversation to another major tool, which of course is artificial intelligence. So many companies are using that right now. There's a lot of myths. There's a lot of questions about it, but it is now commonplace, and it is now an essential tool for protecting your enterprise. And we're going to bring in Marcus Fowler. Marcus, can you sign in? Are you good to go?
I think I'm good to go. I believe you can hear me. Hopefully you can see me, though I'm not sure how my camera is turned on, but
I see a blue screen. I do not see your handsome face.
My handsome mug. It certainly worked in our thing. I have tried to turn it on, but for some reason it is. Let me try this. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Oh, there we go.
Marcus, look at you.
No worries. Look at me. That's what I'll make note. It's the former CIA guy that's willing to show his face. I'm just saying.
There you go. And the questions from the audience are flying in. How many of the books have you actually read?
The backdrop, the library usually gets a question. Like one of these is all my children, so your Dr. Seuss and stuff. So,
okay.
All of those I've probably read many times, each individual one repeatedly. But yes, the library as a backdrop is always a potentially disastrous move, because I have had people take screenshots and try and zoom in on what I'm reading or what has been read.
Excellent. Well, let's roll right into your presentation. Thank you so much for joining us, Marcus.
Yeah, of course. And, both Rick and Josh, fantastic presentations, and they both have touched on this. Excuse me, not Rick and Josh, Josh and Dave, excuse me. Really touched on a number of these things. But in terms of the current crisis, uncertainty, and what it means for not just the past normal, even the current normal, but what the next normal is going to be. I think we really need to think about and really have a good realization too, that the who, what, where of communication is really becoming that much more dynamic for that workforce, right? When we return, it's not going to be everyone surging back. It's going to be more hybrid, more fluid, more flexible, more survivable. And really that's what you need your next tool, your security stack to be doing for you, right? Something that can learn on the job, no matter where the workforce is, where it goes, or where it moves in between, right? In this hybrid, who's at work, who's home, how we change moving forward, you need something that adapts along with your adapting and changing environment. And in the move to this forced work from home, right, we had this huge surge of focus on sustaining business operations. And that really required that security team to catch up as best they could, because the reality was there wasn't a business, you didn't need a security team. So the security team was catching up in terms of how your work environment was changing. That's led to a lot of lessons learned, some observables, and critical things that I think we want to know moving forward. And now that security teams have kind of gotten at least their feet underneath them, though they are still overworked and certainly stressed and anxious, they're now looking to what does the return look like, and what is that going to mean? Oh, I went the wrong direction. Would have thought the down arrow was the next slide. So again, right now, and you've heard this earlier, unprecedented levels of uncertainty and anxiety and disruption is really, a cyber attacker's buffet, right? They can choose from a little of this, a little of that, attack however they see fit, because really those are the times, these events that attackers just take advantage of. And this is a global event, so they're taking advantage of it across the board. Massive spikes in spear phishing. We're also seeing kind of a circling back to previous targets that they maybe weren't able to access, or they failed to get into, because again, right now the attack surface has dramatically and in a really unscheduled event expanded. I think of an organization like NASA or some of these other ones where you might have people that had previously were locked down, now having to work and adapt to environments that the security team hasn't moved into, the human isn't as prepared. You have much more kind of almost a starvation for information, which means more likelihood to click. I think you're seeing them attackers not only scale, but also circle back to previous kind of more meaty targets that they want to take advantage of. And so it's really understanding how things are changing and understanding that dynamic workforce as the best way to defend. One of the things that we, Darktrace did in this area was we accelerated our enhanced email security to total virtual deployments, right? So I think you're also seeing security companies transition and adapt to some of these environments, to different changes within security. So I know, again, I can speak to what Darktrace did immediately was, yes, spear phishing is increasing. We're still seeing vulnerability. We can enhance here. How can we get there quickly and not make it a requirement where it can't be deployed virtually because you have less people going into the data center? I think that is something to be interesting in terms of thinking about how company actions and needs are also changing and causing security companies and vendors to adapt, right? We're hearing a lot more about endpoint and how we're thinking about endpoint. So how are we going to be positioned for endpoint? How can we learn and get that telemetry from the endpoint to have a more robust understanding for artificial intelligence, for that understanding what normal is? These are all key kind of from a premise of not, in that threat agnostic approach where it isn't about understanding what previous attacks did, but what is normal and what isn't necessarily bad but doesn't belong. I apologize for the text on this slide. I was just hot off the press in terms of the information we got from our SOC, but I thought that was pretty interesting and worth bringing in. Once the crisis started to spike, Darktrace pushed its SOC services, its push threat notification to any client that wanted to opt in. So immediately we were gathering hundreds and hundreds of more events and incidents, so we could really do some interesting trend analysis. I thought the group would think some of these things were interesting. At the top, you see crypto mining's up about 4%. That one, we debated and wrestled with, but I think any time that you see unemployment, unstable economy, potential loss of other avenues of revenue, individuals are going to get creative. And I think that is a good indicator of why crypto mining might have gone up. I think another expectation is an increase in insider threat as their employment is unstable and standard. They get worried about fire. They're getting desperate. Those are two areas that we see growing. Not surprising, vulnerable RDP and remote access tools on the rise, especially movement of large data sets, right, which is what we'd expect. But these are areas that we see in terms of also vulnerability and potential to take advantage of it. Spear phishing, we've already spoken to, and then you have internal reconnaissance tools, right, more scanning and those types of things that we're very aware of and tracking. And these is just, again, what we've seen in this month, but I thought it was interesting to see the trends and things that have changed, for the month of April, at least, at a pretty critical time during the crisis. So, the changing threat landscape, they're going to be taking advantage of it. Spear phishing, we've already talked about. Increase in impersonation attacks, increase in fake newsletters, SaaS, more dependency on collaboration technologies. And anytime you're thinking about more websites, more fakes, that's more risk. And that risk is of that human clicking on something, of that human not accessing the VPN when they know they should, not having the best cyber hygiene now that they're in an unfamiliar environment. And I guess one of my messages is I don't think we should blame the human, right? I mean, humans are some of my best friends. The other ones are dogs. Thankfully, they're not barking right now, or you get that as a special addition to my briefing. But we should not rely solely on the employee, or rather, it's unfair because the reality is attackers and the current environment, the current crisis, and moving forward is such a rich environment for impersonations and deep fakes or fakes, and they're being increasingly in sophistication where it is really, really difficult, even for a well-trained, well-experienced human who's on the lookout to fall prey to these things. They're just getting that creative. And while I'm not saying don't train, I'm not saying that they aren't a major player in your security planning. I do think too often we put too much reliance on why can't they just figure out that prince isn't a real prince and they shouldn't click on that link. Well, the attackers are well beyond that as their approach. And I think that's an important thing to stress because, too often I don't think we have enough credibility to what the attackers really are doing, and the things that we're seeing come in, just in the COVID line alone, is really scary just in terms of a way that they're just looking so traditional, novel, relevant. They have the right context. They have the right individuals. Yes, maybe a dot or a period has been dropped in the email address, but those subtleties are very hard for that human to see and to get. So again, not a huge surprise that thinking about legacy approaches, and when I'm talking about legacy approaches, I'm really thinking signatures, knowing about taking historical and applying it to current in order to defend the next. That is flawed, and it will continue to only get worse. It's not about looking for bad. It's really about understanding and enforcing normal. So as the kind of goal of this briefing is, how is artificial intelligence and machine learning helping to predict the dynamic workforce? And it's probably important to kind of first caveat what I mean when I say artificial intelligence, right? So Darktrace is an artificial intelligence native company. It was a technology we focused on when the company was born in 2013. But really, I'm talking about that narrow application of AI, that focused, complex task savant, right? That is so successful in so many other industries because it's going after complex but fairly bound problems. So in thinking that narrow application of AI, it is important. It's not as important as how sophisticated the technology is, but how it's being applied, how and where it's being applied. And the how here for me is really about focusing on understanding your digital prize and your digital environment, and that's what it enforces. I think if you flip that around and say, oh, I want to use AI or machine learning to predict the threat actor or the next attack vector, I think that's a much more complex problem. And I think you're going to fail much more often because it is the level of consistency and certainty. You can understand your digital environment and applying that AI and that machine learning in that space, you are going to be much more successful in trying to predict the threat actor or the attack vector or the vulnerability space. And I think that's even going to get much harder if and when, or not if, but when the attackers start to use AI, which we've seen in the earliest of stages, on the attack. Because that's really not only going to be a scale and scope-ish problem, it's really going to be an unpredictable problem in terms of how they attack. Because that's just the way that AI goes. And we've seen that in kind of every AI competition, human versus AI. It didn't just beat us. It beat us in ways that we didn't even see coming. And that's going to be an increasing threat moving forward. So for Darktrace's, I'm going to walk through kind of Darktrace's application of AI and machine learning, just because it's important in terms of how we do it from our industry approach, in terms of very focused on that threat agnostic. And the classic analogy is kind of going up the human immune system and the human immune system approach. But I go a little bit off brand here for me, is that there's another analogy I like better. So as I mentioned, I'd spent 15 years at the CIA, and before that I was a Marine. So my security approach has been very perimeter, external looking, focusing on the threat. And because when you're thinking about national security, or when you're thinking about U.S. persons and interests globally, you have to go after the threat network, because covering everything in a blanket of security, while nice, you really can't do. So you really have to focus on the threat. So when I left the agency less than a year ago, and I started looking about how we were applying cybersecurity in the public sector, in the private sector, and how companies and what they were dealing with, I really started to see some flaws in that thinking when you're on that private side and you have this back digital environment, though complex, that you need to protect, as compared to trying to predict outwardly. And the analogy that actually worked for me was the kindergarten teacher. Because the kindergarten teacher isn't focusing on the scissors. She or he's not standing at the door looking for the threat. She's maintaining that classroom. She's watching those children, and she's enforcing the normal patterns of activity of those children, no matter where they go and who they are, and learning about each one of those children independently. It may be very different if Sally goes to the door. She just likes to look outside, and that's okay, and that's within bounds of normal, compared to Marcus, who likes to get to the door and then make a run for it, right? So understanding that pattern normal. So I started to really have this kindergarten idea, this kindergarten teacher approach, and the application of artificial intelligence, and its understanding it, and providing that visibility of all those children or devices and data and users at the most granular level became super powerful. And the more I talk to clients and companies and issues, that visibility and that understanding getting harder with the complexity, especially in this, remote workforce environment, getting increasingly complex. While the AI is really providing a lot of visibility and understanding and alerting to not good or bad, but normal and abnormal. And that understanding has become very powerful. And much to my surprise, it actually adapted incredibly well from pre-COVID into the COVID environment, even with all the changes. Certainly there were discussions on, are we getting the right telemetry and understanding of the VPN data and some of these other things, but it actually adapted fairly quickly and showed to have a lot more flexibility than I think even we were anticipating, which has shown it to be very powerful as you move into this more adaptable, flexible environment. The other thing that's been super powerful and super critical, especially in these times, in fact, I was just listening to a hospital in which they really were relying on the cyber AI analyst because it was allowing their workforce to be more effective in less time, right? And that's using the AI, which we use from a supervised learning standpoint in terms of observing our own analysts and then deploying it across our customer base, in which it's now conducting those triages and that events and that investigation, the earliest stages for all events repeatedly in real time constantly, so that when they come in, when an analyst gets to actually put their fingers on the keyboard to take action and start their day, they're actually starting not for a point of initial investigation, but from a triage point of action to move forward. Minimizing alert fatigue, increasing the narrative and shared situational awareness when they can just print out a report and everybody's working off what the cyber analyst has put together, right? Not a single event, but stitching together multiple events to show the entire incident. Talk to a number of clients in which hours on the day are being saved. And when we think about that skill shortage, right, we think about where we are today, because we all know there's not a flood of people coming. It has been super powerful in terms of really supercharging the investigation and also just the increasing morale, right? If you think of it as a staff augmentation, those analysts are now moving forward. Senior analysts can get deeper further, and junior analysts can actually be using the cyber AIMS to get up to speed. What did it do? What did it find? Where did it see it? Transparency and trust certainly are critical because that's how you build it. No one's just going to blindly follow AI, nor would I ever recommend you do that. So ensuring that you have and built in a trust and transparency model that keeps the human in the loop is critical. And the next component, or the final component, is really being able to respond. And that being able to respond at machine speed, right, in the growing scale of attacks. Respond in a way that, again, also takes in part that same trust that you want from the analytics standpoint, from that investigation, into the configuration and ability to respond transparently, but also in a way that is deemed appropriate by the larger organization, and then also the AI. One that is focused on minimizing business disruptions, right? It's not going to take a CEO's entire computer down because something is amiss, right? It's going to enforce what its normal activity is. Let that CEO keep doing what they always do. But for this anomalous activity, go ahead and put it in timeout while the security team can investigate and learn more, right? Having an autonomous response, as we talk and hear about ransomware, in which it's not a matter of hours, even minutes, it's more a matter of seconds in terms of response. And we saw this perfectly in terms of two different hospitals at the same time had Darktrace as the product up. One had autonomous response, the other didn't. The one that had autonomous response, it was a non-event, WannaCry, defeated in less than a couple seconds, while the hospital, though they were on the ball, watching, very responsive security team, alerted to it, actioned it, lost about a half a day. And a half a day for a hospital, I think we all can agree, that's too long, right? Because all the other things they weren't able to do, and distracted by this, too much vulnerability out there, certainly of concern, right? I talked about the cyber AI and being able to correlate. So it isn't just knowing or taking a snapshot of a user in time, right? You're using unsupervised learning. You do have the ability to have this rolling situational awareness. So it's not a snapshot, and so that you can even catch things that were malicious before you arrived, because it's still deviating from normal in terms of the clustered understanding of those servers or that part of the network, right? So it's an in-depth level of understanding. And I think what people immediately start to think about when they think about in-depth, they think about, well, high alerts, high false positives. Well, it isn't a single event that causes an alert. It's actually a stitch together to show like this actually is driving towards malicious. Types of attacks, we've kind of all talked about these that we can run into in terms of threats, spoofing, impersonation. I mean, the number of emails that we've seen that don't even have a malicious link in them, that are just trying to insert themselves in that supply chain, in that business email compromise, recycling different malware so that they're not caught, so that they fall, and then they move through different firewalls and such. We increasingly see that. I mean, these things are critical. And I think what we're also finding, and that I should have mentioned, was beyond just what a single tool brings, the more we are integrating elements within the stack together to get more value across it is becoming increasingly critical, right? So how is that AI brain integrating and acting at the firewalls, at the endpoint, right, within the network? It isn't simply about using telemetry from one source and acting in that one area, but rather broadly across the entire tool stack and bringing as much value to everything that's in that. Because I think as we're learning, as businesses are struggling, budgets are becoming tighter, how do you maximize value and think about not necessarily consolidation, but really more from any given product or that they're kind of platform of products and then value across the greater stack. So a couple of fun, I say fun, but interesting case studies. The first, employee at a large law firm, victim of a spear phishing account. Not a surprise, it's on the rise. TrickBot malware, right, which I think if anyone's familiar, very nasty bit of information stealing malware. In fact, I saw another incident this morning associated with TrickBot, so that seems to either be on the rise or we're just seeing more of it get recycled. We also saw it's leveraged with the Empire PowerShell, so that's more hands-on. So advanced attackers. And when I look at something like autonomous lateral movement, right, I think about insider threat, or I think about that east-west traffic. I do think about what it's going to mean when it's powered by or influenced or enabled more by artificial intelligence from the attacker. That's only going to be that much more subtle. It's only going to be able to hide in the noise more. It's going to be able to camouflage and be within that environment to do more damage more quickly. So this is one case where you see what it looks like on its face, and then you do wonder about what is the next stage of this type of attack. Much like we've seen ransomware evolve, all of these elements are evolving as fast, or if not faster, than security teams are adapting. Similar in terms of area that we would think to see AI play a role is C2, command and control. The more autonomous it is within your digital environment, the much harder it is to be able to discover. Here we had a power and electric company, or water and power, excuse me, external C2 indicators, but they were really trying to blend in to the level of traffic based on what ports they were using. There's an intelligent understanding of environment and context in this movement, which really these slow and low are only going to get harder, and that's why that granularity of normal versus abnormal, totally forgetting what is designated as bad versus designated as good, is becoming increasingly critical with each step of the stage. And I think the one area for me that at least brings some pause or optimism, right, is that on the deployment of AI, that narrow AI, that machine learning to enrich understanding, to supercharge investigation, to ensure there's response, it is much further along on the defending side than it is on the offense side. And the real reason I believe that is because the attackers haven't needed it, right? And what they're doing is working just fine, right? The return on investment is good, and the AI technical hurdle is probably still a bit too high. But there's no real reason for them to make this surge towards AI, especially at a time like now, where it is target-rich environment, lots of uncertainty for them to take advantage of, and they probably see this happening, continuing for the next year to year and a half. That they're going to have this kind of golden age of cyber attacks because of the level of uncertainty, anxiety, and unstable security environment for those companies that are trying to adapt and evolving as they go.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, Marcus, very, very much for that presentation. Got a question here. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, perfect. One of the questions that came in, it's a little complex. Is there any way for, I guess we have almost 400 people still on with you, any way to trial this type of AI, this dark trace kind of tool, without fully committing to it?
Sure. I mean, of course, great question. One that I'd be more than happy to answer. The reality is I could show you a shiny demo. There are plenty of webinars out there that'll show you a shiny demo. They all look good because that's what they're designed to do.
Sure.
But if you don't put it on in your environment and do that proof of value, then how are you going to really know? And 30-day free trial, it deploys fairly quickly. I think an hour to install. And in fact, the email only, it deploys in minutes in terms of how it's able to enhance and how quickly. And those proof of values let you see the visibility that you haven't seen before, the emails that should have been caught that weren't by other tools, that's where you get the value, right? By seeing it and letting your security folks kick the tires, ask the questions,
Right.
we'll run it through its paces.
Right. What about a small business? Obviously, large corporations need artificial intelligence. There's too much data going in and out. But the small business, maybe the $5 to $10 million enterprise, would they be a candidate for using AI?
Yeah, I think, and then, you know, much like we're threat agnostic, we get to be in industry or even size agnostic. It becomes a different conversation in terms of what other things they have that we integrate with or don't integrate with. We have some that use that are Darktrace only, right? It might have some other things hanging on. So I think it matters the company, the sophistication. You know, some places we integrate with a SIM and our alerts go there, and then they can come deep dive in our tool and our threat visualizer when they want to. Some people have us as their first pane of glass that they see in the morning because you have that cyber AI analyst to help you with that and threat investigation, then spin off. I think it's a lot of, I mean, as much as we configure to workflow, we want to also configure to digital environment and all of those things as well.
Terrific. A lot of things to consider. I'm a small business owner, obviously myself, so I should certainly start considering using some AI as well. And I know what to call it. And to that point, I just shared Lucas Ryder's information for the people that are on with us, and there's quite a few. If you have any questions for the Darktrace team, I just shot you out a chat to everyone. Marcus, thank you again for your presentation. As always, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Darktrace is wonderful. I know your CEO, Nicole Egan, and she's just a great entrepreneur. And you know, keep on doing keep doing the right thing and stay safe.
Thank you, Bradford. Appreciate it. It's always great to talk to your audience. It was actually one of the first ones I got to do when I joined the company, and I've always enjoyed it very much.
Thanks. Hopefully we'll have some live events one of these days. Maybe, who knows, right?
Who knows? It's fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I look forward to it.
All right. Well, let's wash our hands and off to the next speaker. You take care, buddy.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Bye-bye, Marcus. Okay. Our final speaker is one of the most experienced cybersecurity advisors with the Department of Homeland Security. Their new division is called CISA, and Jeff Janista will debrief you on that, talk about current threats, best practices, and so forth. And let's see if he is on board. Are you with us, Jeff?
Yeah. Good morning. Good afternoon, depending.
Okay. I will speak to you all soon. We have another Power Hour tomorrow for a different region. We've got the contact information and the follow-up for everyone on your screen. And we are going to post this entire video online at Cyber Summit USA. Thank you again for joining us. We do look forward to seeing you live, hopefully in the very near future. But until then, we're going to deliver these Power Hours right to your home. You take care. Stay safe. On behalf of the Cybersecurity Summit team, we want you to trust nobody and you know, stay secure. Thank you again for joining us.